In the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, God is one. Amen. Well, good morning, Gary. It looks like it's just you and I here at the moment. So that's a private moment between you and I. Just like where you are. Right here, it's actually rather pleasant. It's not quite as sticky and humid as it was yesterday. But the sun is out. The sky is patchy blue, more than white, which is lovely. And there's a nice cooling breeze, which is also a good thing. Good morning, George. I expect you're rather warmer than we are here in England, but that's good. Good morning, Anton. Happy Little Friday to you. I was thinking about Little Friday this morning when I was getting up. I also thought about you, Anton, last night. I put some oven-baked chips, French fries, as Americans call them, into the oven last night to cook, where I forgot all about them. And when I looked at them later on, they were burnt to a crisp. I thought, these are Anton crisps. So there we go. This shows how curiously my mind works. Right, today, well, also last night, the whole of my upstairs of the house was without light because we had the electrician in yesterday to fix the electricity. The result being that nothing works. Oh dear. Anyway, there we go. Good morning to Tony. Gentle, soft rain falling on Ireland today. Well, there we are. They changed. Finley. Yes, certainly pray for your brother, Alistair. Has leukemia. If you're watching this much later, say 3 or 4 years from now, then carry on praying for each other because you know God hears our prayers outside time. So, no, Anton, you'll always be known to me as a silly sausage. Good morning, Natalia. God bless you, Finley. It's hard, it's harsh, very harsh, when we have to deal with the illness and sickness of people we love. There's something about that, really, and what St. Paul is going to tell us today, but I don't want to sound trite or anything else about these things because the deep pain and suffering that everybody around somebody who's suffering, who loves that person, also feels, can sometimes be worse than the person who's actually suffering it. Anyway, there we go. Now today we're going to be looking at Romans chapter 8, 18 to 25. Let me read this straight away. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Not only that, but we also have the first fruits of the Spirit. Even we ourselves groan within ourselves, eagerly awaiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body. For we were saved in this hope. But hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one still hope for what one sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance. Slight apology there. I was retranslating some not very nice English into slightly better English, which shouldn't be doing. Never mind. Poor old Tertius. There he is writing down what St. Paul is saying. And Paul carries on going. He keeps on having new thoughts and so on. And this is why it is, like I said before, that the writings of St. Paul are often so complex. Just noticed actually there's a problem with the push settings. Right, does that work better? Not sure whether it's working at all now. Can you hear anything? Somebody tell me if you can hear anything now. Yeah, it works better. Good. I thought it might do. Good morning, Thekla. I have something to show to you as well. Right. Good. That's better. Very tinny. It was much more tinny before, I would think. Okay, so this should be a bit better anyway. I noticed that the plug had come out of the side. It's a little bit loose. Good morning, Christina. So we've got that. We've got Tertius there. He is writing away, and St. Paul is going off on this one. And at this point, when St. Paul starts writing, he probably turned to St. Paul and said, "Hey up, Paul," because he had a northern accent. You need a thesaurus, you do. And St. Paul would say, why? He said, you said that word several times already in this letter, and the word that he's using is the one that's translated here, for I consider. And what has happened is that the translators have decided that they don't want to use the same old word that Paul has used the same old way, the same old times, so frequently before. But the word that he's using is logizomi, which means to count up. When you go to a Greek restaurant, you use a word that's very similar when you want the bill. You want the addition, as it were, your account, your reckoning. And St. Paul is using this word here. He says, I reckon, when I count up, when I add up the sufferings of this present time, I find them not to be worthy to be compared with, some unusually good English there, to compared with, after nowadays people say compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. So on one hand, you have the sufferings, I'm putting that in my left hand, and on the other hand, you have the glory, which St. Paul is talking about. He's saying, even though you have added up all the sufferings, it doesn't come anywhere near the glory that is going to be coming, I'll have to stand up, in the future. And that's the background that St. Paul is thinking about here. And so really when I consider is not really the best word for it. When I add up would have been better. When I reckon up, like something other, reckoning up the bill and so on, would have been a much better choice of words. But they've changed it because he's used this word several times before. And it makes it into one of those Pauline words. You know the way it is that if somebody asks you to write a letter on their behalf, you write it, you might try and write in the other person's voice, but inevitably you write using the words that you use and the way that you write them. And therefore all of your friends say, oh, Ted didn't write these, you wrote this, didn't you? And you have to say, well, Ted asked me to write it for him. I won't tell you who Ted is. So you have that sort of idea there. Now, St. Paul is well used to sufferings. He's writing this letter probably as he's coming to the end of his third missionary journey. He's heading off to Jerusalem. He thinks, next time round, I'd like to go and visit those guys in Rome. So I'm going to soften them up a bit. And here he's talking about the sufferings and so on he's already had. Well, we know by this time he's had plenty of sufferings. So we're roughly in Acts chapter 20 to 23, somewhere around about there. And if you look back in Acts, you can see he's been beaten, he's been stoned, he's been thrown out, he's been suffering a shipwreck, he's been left for dead, he's been thrashed, he's been put in prison, and so on. So St. Paul knows something about suffering for the gospel. most of his suffering is behind him. He's going to have a different sort of suffering now. In prison, he'll have his liberty taken off him, and he's going to be taken off to Rome, where he suffers a shipwreck, a bite from a snake. He ends up in Rome, but probably he then gets released. Goes off and does another missionary journey that we know nothing about. Very sad. Anyway, there we go. And he adds all these things up. He puts all his sufferings into one column. You notice the way he likes column and comparing things one against another. It's another very Pauline thing. He also makes lots of lists. So he makes a list of all the ways that you can sin. Ooh, I haven't thought about that one, you say when you read them. Try that this afternoon. And for Paul, suffering is an attribute of the Christian life. He more or less assumes that if you become a Christian, you can expect to suffer, like poor old Melengeth in her hot and muggy tunnel. Poor you. Anyway, but this suffering is, of course, suffering that goes directly to the very core of the person concerned. You're being thrashed or imprisoned or made to endure humiliation. And he then compares that with what is going to be revealed. And the word there is, we get the word apocalypse from it in English. The apocalypse, apocalyptheny. So apocalyptheny. And it's the revealing of those things that are hidden. So what will become revealed is glory for those people who have suffered or endured and continued to the end. Okay, that's a really important idea in Paul, and he'll come back onto this enduring later on in this paragraph. Carries on, so the glory which shall be apocalypsed in us, for the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. Nowadays we say of the children of God, the sons and daughters of God. Now, isn't that interesting? There's something about our salvation which affects the entire cosmos, the entirety of creation. And creation is not just what we see, although in fact, here the idea that St. Paul has in mind, the word that he uses is ktisis, which is about the material creation. So things that are made out of atoms, from my Christmas mug through to the sun and the entire universe. Everything that's made out of atoms. All of that, he says, is eagerly awaiting for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. We're not quite certain what that entire verse means, interestingly. Not at all certain. And if you read any of the commentaries, or any of the church fathers, some respond to it in one way and some in another way. And the question really is, who subjected it in hope? In the Orthodox Study Bible, they've decided that it's God who subjected it in hope. But there's another way of reading it where you can get the idea that it is Adam who subjected it and then God who gave it hope. And either of those two things are legitimate ways of translating this, but it does have an effect. Anyway, we carry on, and many people think that it's really God who does this, that it means that the background meaning of it, though, is important and is the same either way. And that is this. Let's just read it again. For creation was subjected to futility. Now, what does that mean? The idea there that St. Paul seems to have in his mind is if you look at creation, just like humanity, you discover that all of creation also appears to be riven through with cracks that make creation itself appear to suffer degradation and death. So we know it to be true of all living things, but also if you think about the world itself, how much it has changed, and the way that the entirety of our world at the moment appears to be suffering from this degradation and death. And another part of the scriptures in one of the Psalms, and I can't remember which one it is, it talks about the whole of the world wearing out like an old coat that is finally folded up and disposed of. And here we have the similar sort of idea. Creation itself subjected to futility, okay? That even there, creation took part in the fall of humanity and therefore is subject to the problems that humanity brought into the world. So the creation we look around and see now is the sort of post Adam and the fruit episode, Adam and Eve and the fruit episode type of creation. It decays too. But we don't leave it there. If you look at Genesis and the story about Noah, Genesis chapter 9, and particularly verses 12 and 13, there's something really important there, and that is that God makes a covenant not just with Noah, but with every living creature on earth. And that covenant gives hope not just to Noah, but gives also, yes, it is Christos, that is the psalm I have in mind. But gives hope also to the whole of creation. Okay, so the covenant is not just in Noah, but with everything, everybody, all living things. That's quite important. Now, in the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse of John, chapter 21, verse 5, but actually the whole of that chapter, you have a number of very positive things being said about the whole of creation. One of them is, "Behold, I make all things new." And shortly after the Lord has said this, the New Jerusalem, which is a perfect and enormous cube in which God himself is the temple and the Lamb of God, Christ, is the temple, and the whole place shines with uncreated light. So there's no need for a lamp, or there's no darkness there, no hiddenness, and everything is magnificent within it, utterly perfect and utterly glorious, is built on earth. Okay? And bad news to dogs, because they sit outside and they bark. But all things. So this gives a sort of hope for everything we see, the whole material creation. So they might well perish, they might all wear out like a garment, but God makes all things new. And the idea that St. Paul continues to say, he says this, because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. That's very interesting, isn't it? It carries on actually also. But do you notice the way creation is delivered into the glorious liberty of the children of God? Now this gives the idea that, again, if you think about a Venn diagram, a Venn diagram has supersets and sets. So the superset might be all human beings. And then within that, you have the subset, which would be all human beings who are Orthodox priests. Okay, so a little tiny group of people within that. And here we have the feeling here that the superset here is all of humanity, which has been set free, and creation becomes a subset of that. So it's within that. The fallen creation is liberated into the freedom of the sons of God, which is an interesting idea, which means that not only we're not just the problem for creation, but actually in us, creation finds the solution. As we are saved, so creation itself is also saved. Okay? For we know, says St. Paul, interesting, he says, for we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. And St. Paul here thinks of things like earthquakes, tsunamis, storms, fires, eruptions, and all of that sort of stuff, all that natural disaster. All of that is the creation groaning and laboring with the birth pangs as it tries to come to perfection. Wow. Yes, Christina. Wow. And this is another wow in my mind, that you have this whole thing. Actually, yes, they are beautiful words. Okay, all of it, groaning and laboring, and so on. And you have the idea of something wanting to give birth to something perfect. Why is life so painful, you might ask? And the answer, the glib answer to that, is sin. But it's not just the glib answer, but it's actually also the real answer, according to St. Paul. Why don't we all live perfectly beautiful lives? And part of the answer to that is because we sin, everybody else sins, and the creation itself is now subjected to sin. Okay? Subjected to it, and that's why it is not perfect. However, says St. Paul, when people are finally liberated, the whole of the rest of creation will be liberated into our liberation too. So a silly thought. Therefore, there's possibly hope for your Kentucky Fried Chicken. The chicken might look at you accusingly in the future and say, weren't you the one who bought me from KFC? Well, maybe not quite that direct. Not only that, says St. Paul in verse 23 and onwards, but we also have the first fruits of the Spirit. Even we ourselves groan within ourselves, eagerly awaiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body. So St. Paul looks at the world, material creation, groaning like something wishing to give birth. And he thinks that also he himself is like a woman in labor, going through these terrible agonies before giving birth to something brand new and beautiful and pure and innocent and lovely, another person. And what is it that actually is he looking forward to? He says, we're eagerly awaiting for the adoption, the redemption of our soma, of our body. Now, that's interesting. And it gives this strong feeling of salvation being a process. So he's going to talk in a moment. I'll read the rest of it because that helps make it say, for we were saved in this hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one still hope for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance. Okay, you see there, you've got two different hopes there. He says we have received one thing, okay? We've been saved in this hope, and we're going to carry on being saved in this hope when we're fully redeemed, and we have received, it's better to put it the way he says it, we have received the salvation, the adoption, the redemption of our body. And although he's talked already about being adopted as sons and daughters of God, there's still an adoption still to come. In the study Bible, it quite nicely reminds us of the iconostasis. If you look at an iconostasis, you'll see there are always there's always a door in the middle, and then to our left of the door, there is Mother of God holding Christ, and to the right of the door, there is Christ himself holding a gospel. And we have, therefore, three comings of Christ. You have the first coming, the incarnation. You have the final coming, which is Christ coming in judgment, which is on the right-hand side door. And then in the middle, you've got what we live in now, the door in between. And we're in that door in between. And Christ comes to us, obviously, in the reading of the scriptures, in the bringing out of the sacraments, in the preaching of the priest and of the church, and all the other times, and in the blessings the priest gives, which is really God giving those blessings. But all of that shows that we haven't actually yet reached the icon on the right-hand side, the second coming. And so we live in that gap between the two icons, the first coming and the second coming. And where we are is in the middle, where Christ comes to us through the church and through the work of the church. That didn't bang too much. Okay? So we have the hope that we've been saved, the hope that we're being saved, the hope that one day we will be saved. And St. Paul says about this hope, which he doesn't see as something or other that, I hope it's going to be a nice day tomorrow, but it might not be. It's like having booked a beautiful holiday and you're living in that's a hope and expectation of having it. Anton's a great expert of having holidays. Enables you to have, and St. John Chrysostom says about this hope, the fact that everything is not done and dusted already. St. John Chrysostom says about this, says, if you have this hope to which you're looking forward, it enables you to have a small part in your own salvation, to work towards it yourself. Okay? There we are. I think that's enough for today. It's 29 minutes. Even Christopher was teasing me yesterday as I was taking him. I know you do, Anton. Christopher was teasing me yesterday as I was taking him home. He unexpectedly called in, which was very nice. It gave me a bit of a shock. We ought to call it 50 at 10, not even 49 anymore. But yesterday, when I was opening up my freezer and trying to get some of these chips that I overcooked, what did I find in there? But some of last year's mince pies, which were now gloriously out of date, but I should try them and see if they're okay. Here we are. This reminds me of Thekla. There they are, Thekla. This is what they look like. These ones are nothing like as nice as they look on the packet, but they are quite nice nevertheless, and I shall have one with my 11s, and you can turn down anything of Christmas all the way through the year. They contain with them all sorts of things. Traditionally, as I said before, they should be slightly boat-shaped. This one's got holly on top of it. This is quite a deep fill. They used to give these out in the prison at Christmas time. But at Christmas time, this part here is so thin, the The prisoners used to call them Christmas mince pie surprise, because the surprise was if you actually had any mince in them, let alone a currant. And they'd open them up and say, "Whoa, look at this." Because there might actually be a currant in them, but most of them is just a sort of spicy goo without any fruit at all. Anyway, there we go. Okay, so there are 12 of them there. So hopefully lots of people will call in and they'll each have a mince pie as a foretaste of one of the feasts to come. There we are. Right, if you could then, young Noah, it's his first day at school today. He had his other first day at school cancelled because of COVID. But if you could pray for him, first day at school, new school is new to him too. So hopefully he's being looked after carefully by the teachers there and introduced to some nice lads who are going to show him around and take care of him. There's a lot that a form tutor can do to make somebody's life very enjoyable. And there's a lot that they can forget to do that makes it really quite appalling. Anyway, if you could pray today, particularly for somebody, two people new, both of them have cancer. The one is a friend of mine from a long time ago, not seen him for 20 odd years, called Paul. His wife Sandra. But Paul is in hospital with pancreatic cancer, and he's now in a hospice and expected to die soon. And that I know is a very painful cancer, so pancreatic cancer. And the other one is Finley's brother, Alistair, with leukemia. So let's keep just those two in our prayers today. Okay? Pray for them. Right. I'll just have a quick look to see what people are saying. It's all about chicken and breadcrumbs, I know. Anything else? Oh, Malengith. Good morning, Nicoletta. There might be other people to say hello to. It's just Nicoletta. Good morning, God bless you. Malengith says, anyone who becomes Orthodox learns that St. Paul is right. There's a honeymoon period, then suffering begins, in waves perhaps, but undoubtedly part of the Christian life in this fallen world. Yes, and you'll find all sorts of persecutions, some of them very serious, some of them very terrible. KFC is terrible. I don't really know. I used to have a cat called Rudolph, and he loved chicken. On one occasion, he was always stealing food from other people's houses, and I'd go into my kitchen and I'd find a chicken in there or a chicken leg. He didn't mind if it was cooked. He didn't even mind if it had been eaten, just the bones were there or some skin. He'd steal that too. And he'd steal it raw, he'd steal it cooked. He didn't care. Poor old Rudolph. He was black, but he had a red nose. He'd also steal sausages and things like that too, and any meat, he'd nick all of that. On one occasion, I was in my study, and I could hear the cat flap going, but you know that's a ba-bang-de-bang makes sort of noise. And it's going ba-bang-de-bang, ba-bang-de-bang. And I thought, what's that cat up to? So I went and had a look, and he was eating some KFC on my kitchen floor. And then he went out and he brought in another piece. And I looked out the window, and there, in the old days, there used to be boxes rather than buckets. There was a box of 6 helpings of Kentucky Fried Chicken, 6 helpings of chips, and sauces and other things to go with it as well. So I immediately hurried it inside the house before whoever my neighbor was who'd and the wife and 4 children or husband and 4 children discovered KFC had gone missing. It was still piping hot. I've often wondered how they made sense of that. Anyway, Rudolph, he was a nice cat. Maybe there's hope for him and the Kentucky Fried Chicken too. Oh dear, oh dear. he once stole my next door neighbour's turkey. He couldn't move it, so he just sat on top of it, and he sat on top of this turkey and ate it, or ate a large chunk of it. So I had to give my neighbours my turkey, and I had theirs with a big lump out of it. I just covered it. I gave it a wash, covered it with bacon, and none of the guests I had noticed. Anyway, more seriously, pray for each other. God bless you and keep you. God willing, tomorrow will be Big Friday, and we'll carry on along these things. Your prayers. God bless you. Oh, poor old Rudolph. Oh, come on. And